Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through the research so you don't have to. Today, we're starting with something pretty remarkable. Imagine finding tiny marine shells, the kind you see scattered on a beach, but they're found 200 kilometers inland, deep inside a cave in Papua New Guinea. What story could these possibly tell? Well, it turns out quite a big one.
Yes, it's fascinating. The focus here is Walufeni Cave. It's located on the eastern edge of the Great Papuan Plateau, the GPP. And this is a huge limestone karst area. We're talking over 2,000 square kilometers. For a long time, it was sort of an archaeological mystery.
Right, despite being this bridge between the highlands and the coast.
Exactly. But recent work at Walufeni, it's uncovered these deep cultural layers, amazing rock art, too. It's clearly a very significant site.
Okay, so our mission here for you listening is to unpack how these little shells, combined with language, with oral traditions, are basically rewriting the history books for ancient Oceania.
It really is. We're moving past those old ideas of, static, isolated groups.
Towards something much more dynamic.
A vast interaction sphere. That's the picture emerging. It challenges a lot of assumptions.
So it's not just, oh, they traded some shells. It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It's about cultural exchange, actual movement of people, how ideas spread over millennia. It shows a level of sophistication and interconnectedness we maybe didn't fully appreciate before.
These weren't isolated little communities.
No, they were nodes in a network, a living network.
So let's get into Walufeni Cave itself. The occupation goes back. How far?
Over 10,000 years. It's an incredibly deep record. Archaeologists see sort of three main phases.
Okay.
An early intensive phase, that's early Holocene, maybe 10,000 to 8,000 years ago. Then activity drops off a bit in the mid-Holocene, and then there's a pretty significant gap, a hiatus.
Ah, the hiatus. That makes what comes next stand out, right?
Precisely, because after that gap, around 3,500 years ago, things pick up again. A lot more cultural material, clear signs of reoccupation right up to historical times.
And that's when the shells appear.
Exactly. Right in that late Holocene phase, dated pretty tightly to about 3,400 to 3,100 years ago. Let's say around 3,250 years ago, median age. Suddenly, marine shells.
Wow. So what kind of shells are we talking about? Are they big, obvious ones?
No, that's the thing. Mostly Nacerius species, dog whelks, over 50 of those. Also some olive shells, a few cowries. And they're tiny. The Nacerius are like 5 to 8 millimeters long. Little sea snails, basically. Gastropods.
Tiny shells traveling 200 kilometers inland. And you said they were modified.
Every single one. Their backs, the dorsal surface were removed. Often looks like percussion, maybe struck against something hard.
To make a hole.
To make a hole, yeah. Clearly for threading them, like beads. Some even had traces of red ochre, or maybe resin.
So definitely not just collected shells. They were worked on, valued.
Absolutely. And this stands in stark contrast to the other shells found there.
Ah, you mentioned freshwater mussels.
Right. Found throughout the site's history. But they're thin, broken, clearly just food waste. No sign they were used for decoration or anything special.
So the marine shells were exotic imported items.
Exotic, intentionally modified, and carried a very long way. Remember, Walufeni is about 200 kilometers direct line from the southern coast.
That distance is key. It implies real effort, real value.
It has to. It implies planning, maybe specific journeys, or established exchange networks already in place.
Which really starts to chip away at those older ideas, doesn't it? The sort of Eurocentric view of these societies as static or simple.
Completely. That narrative often portrayed indigenous groups here as geographically stuck, unchanging, isolated.
But this evidence, even from tiny shells, suggests the opposite.
It points to a highly dynamic, complex, interconnected past. It's a necessary correction to those outdated perspectives.
So if it's this interconnected sphere, how do we conceptualize that? Is there a model for it?
There is. Ian McNiven's concept of the Coral Sea Cultural Interaction Sphere, the CSCIS, is really helpful here.
Okay, CSCIS, what does that encompass?
Think of it as this huge zone of interchange trade, ideas, people moving, linking New Guinea, the Torres Strait Islands, and northeastern Australia. A massive cultural highway across the sea and land.
But wasn't that model mainly focused on maritime coastal connections?
Initially, yes. It was largely modeled as a sea-based system. But the Walufeni finds, being so far inland, argue powerfully that these networks reached deep into the interior.
Oh.
Probably via the major river systems. Think of the Kikori, the Purari, the Strickland rivers. These are natural corridors leading from the coast right up towards the plateau.
So the shells showing up at Walufeni around 3,250 years ago gives us a date, a time marker, for when these inland riverine connections were active within that wider CSEIS.
Exactly. It provides solid temporal evidence for the early stages of this sphere extending far inland. It's showing us the depth, geographically and temporally, of these interactions.
And the shells themselves, what was their role? More than just pretty beads, presumably.
Oh, much more. In New Guinea, culturally modified marine shells weren't just currency, though they could function that way. They were potent symbols.
Symbols of what?
Status, prestige. They were used in rituals, sometimes as practical tools, but crucially, they were vital for creating and maintaining social ties between groups over long distances. They cemented relationships, obligations.
Right, I see. And we have ethnographic examples of this, right, from more recent history.
We do, and they shed a lot of light. Specific types, like cowries, the big volute or baller shells, conus or cone shells, these were widely traded. Think about conus shell armbands. Highly valued, sometimes coming from the Massim region way off to the east. Essential for things like bride price or major social payments. Their value wasn't just economic, it was social and symbolic.
Interesting how that might vary, too.
It does. In the Highlands, getting ornamental shells could really boost your status in those hierarchical big man systems. It was visible wealth. But down on the south coast, say, among the Bosabi people, shell exchange was more embedded in reciprocity, mutual obligation, reinforcing community bonds. Less about individual status, more about the group.
And this tradition continues.
To some extent, yes. Shells are still really important in ceremonial dress, like for the Ajema or Jazaro ceremonies. You see costumes incorporating elements clearly inspired by or traded from coastal groups, even Torres Strait Islanders. It speaks to this ongoing cultural dialogue.
So it's shells, but it's also clearly about people moving, ideas moving. What other evidence points to the movement of people themselves?
Oral traditions are incredibly important here. You find stories among the Kasua people, for example, that place their origins down near the Purari Gulf on the coast.
Really? So their own history remembers a coastal connection.
Yes, often mentioning a route via Lake Kutubu. Other groups, like the Kaser, have traditions linking them to migrations up the Trauma River Valley towards Mount Bosabi. These aren't just myths. They encode historical movement and connection over vast landscapes.
And language. Can linguistics back this up?
To a degree, yes. Linguistic analysis shows connections. The Kasua language shares vocabulary with neighbors like Kaluli, Onabasulu, Etoro, Biami. This points to contact, interaction, maybe borrowing, perhaps migration waves.
And what about shared beliefs or stories?
That's maybe one of the most compelling lines of evidence. There's this widespread cultural hero figure known as Sido or Sao. His story, his myth cycle, stretches all the way from Torres Strait, right across the western Gulf of Papua, and reaches as far north as the eastern GPP near Walufeni.
Wow, that's a huge area for one shared myth.
It strongly suggests a deep, shared socio-cultural fabric connecting these seemingly disparate communities. It's evidence for the movement of profound ideas and possibly people carrying those ideas, potentially dating back much earlier than we can see historically.
So putting it together, it's not like one big migration or one continuous trade route. It's more complex.
It seems like it. The archaeology, with those gaps and reoccupations we see at Walufeni, and also at other sites like Epe Amoho Rock Shelter, it suggests more like pulses.
Pulses of movement.
Pulses of movement, interaction, occupation over thousands of years. These pulses connected the coast, the plateau, the highlands, weaving them together into this dynamic system that ebbed and flowed.
And the timing of the shells at Walufeni, around 3,250 years ago, does that fit into any broader regional changes happening around then?
It fits remarkably well, actually. This is around the time we see other major shifts in the late Holocene. For instance, the arrival of Austronesian-speaking Lapita peoples along the southern coast of PNG.
Ah, the Lapita, famous for their pottery.
Exactly. They arrive after about 2,900 years ago, and their arrival seems to spark further movement, including expansion into the Torres Strait from around 2,600 years ago. These are big population movements happening in the background.
And the pottery itself provides more evidence of these connections, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You find Lapita pottery at coastal sites like Caution Bay, dating to 2,900 years ago, Hopo, around 2,600 years ago. But it goes further. Other pottery turns up on Jiguru Lizard Island off the Australian coast around 2,950 years ago. And crucially, in the eastern Murray Islands of Torres Strait, dating to 2,600 years ago.
And you can trace where that pottery came from.
Yes. Analysis of the clay temper in that Murray Island pottery shows it originated in the Purari River Basin back in southern Papua New Guinea.
Incredible. So that's physical proof of materials moving potentially hundreds of kilometers by sea, linking the Torres Strait directly back to those inland river systems.
It's undeniable evidence of sophisticated maritime voyaging and established exchange networks linking these regions.
Were there other changes happening too, like how people were living?
Yes, we also see shifts in subsistence around this time. There's evidence for using sago palm, that starchy staple appearing at Lake Kutubu around 3,000 years ago, and at that Epe Amoho rock shelter a bit later, between 2,850 and 2,500 years ago.
So new food sources or strategies emerging as well.
Indicating broader regional adaptations, perhaps population growth, resource management changes, all happening in the same dynamic period.
Okay, so stepping back, we started with these tiny shells, 200 kilometers inland. But when you weave that thread together with the linguistics, the oral histories, the pottery evidence, the subsistence shifts.
It paints a really compelling picture.
Yeah.
A picture of ancient indigenous societies in this vast region, Papua New Guinea, Torres Strait, Australia, as incredibly complex, dynamic, and interconnected.
Far from static or isolated.
Far from it. Connected across huge distances, by sea and by river. It fundamentally changes how we should view this part of the world's deep history.
So this deep dive, prompted by just a few small shells from Walufeni Cave, it really has opened up a whole new perspective on ancient Oceania.
It truly has. It's a testament, really, to the sophistication, the resilience, the interconnectedness of these indigenous societies. They were moving, trading, sharing complex ideas across vast landscapes long before European narratives tried to simplify their past.
It certainly defies those older static views.
Absolutely.
And it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? If a handful of tiny shells found so far inland can unlock this view of a vast, dynamic, ancient world, what other hidden connections are still out there, waiting under our feet, maybe held within oral traditions, ready to challenge everything we thought we knew about the sheer depth and richness of human history?